Ever notice how ancient maps were basically Google Maps, but with more dragons and way less accuracy? Imagine you're a medieval traveler asking for directions, and the village sage hands you a scroll proudly featuring "Here be dragons," chomping down right where you plan to picnic. People like to think those old parchment charts were neat and orderly. North always up, no shenanigans, and oceans that didn't just spill off the edge of the world like Mother Nature's own water park. Spoiler alert, ancient mapmakers moonlighted as fantasy novelists. Romans and Greeks truly believed sea serpents and the edge of the world were just pit stops on their commute. No wonder land out there was dirt cheap, though getting home was a nightmare. Medieval Europeans didn't so much map as they collected rumors, merchant tall tales, and, let's be honest, a generous splash of winging it. Even Ptolemy's famous world maps weren't exactly GPS. They were more guesstimate with style. Meanwhile, the Chinese crafted gorgeous, detailed maps, until you hit the borders, where things got blurrier than a tipsy sailor's memory. Nautical debates were less, how do we get to India, and more, should we turn left at Atlantis or follow that mermaid? And yet, despite dragons, mystery islands, and more guesswork than a magic 8-ball, these maps didn't just mislead. They kicked off the greatest adventures and epic wild goose chases in history. So next time you're lost, just be grateful your GPS doesn't suggest asking a kraken for directions. Despite the belief in their accuracy, not all maps were made from first-hand exploration. Imagine a time when Google Maps meant nothing more than a pair of muddy boots and an unruly sense of adventure. Back in the good old days of ancient and medieval cartography, mapmakers didn't crowdsource from satellites. They hit the actual road, or ocean, enduring impossible odds and camels with zero appreciation for comfort, all to gather real-life data. Forget traffic jams. These explorers faced malaria, pirates, and the utterly terrifying prospect of falling off the world's edge. Legends like Ibn Battuta, Zheng He, and Amerigo Vespucci weren't just travel influencers. They jotted down priceless notes and baffling sketches while dodging storms or desperately clinging to the nearest donkey. Their early GPS was basically a guy pointing randomly. A compass and local guides helped sometimes, but there was no Wikipedia, and trees and volcanoes stubbornly refused to pose for selfies. Sure, their data was as messy as their boots, but without these mildly unhinged, highly adventurous souls, our modern maps would still showcase the occasional sea monster. Survey says, if you didn't catch a tropical disease, you probably weren't mapping hard enough. And thus began the bumpy and undeniably epic road to accurate world maps. However, even those venturing out included mythical creatures on their charts. Did you think old maps brimmed with sea monsters just because cartographers had vivid imaginations and a flair for drama? Think again. In the days before Google Earth, mapmakers believed in monsters as casually as we believe in Wi-Fi. After all, why shouldn't the ocean be Bowser's favorite vacation spot? According to weathered logs, and even more weathered sailors who wrote them, the seas teemed with peculiar creatures, giant squids, whales, and on a bad day, a sailor long overdue for a bath. Give a sailor a squint at a whale, and soon you've got a sea serpent that could wrap itself around Denmark. Scientific understanding was foggier than a North Sea morning. Every bobbing log or twitching shadow became a kraken trying out for a starring role. Destinations crowded with tentacled horrors were basically Renaissance-era clickbait. Here be tentacles, warning off would-be rivals and trade thieves alike. Of course, many monsters turned out to be whales or walruses, blown up to Cthulhu-sized nightmares by sailors with exceptional lung capacity for tall tales. Then marine biology showed up and the monsters deflated, but our maps and imaginations never quite recovered. These mythical elements often fueled misconceptions about the Earth's shape. Picture a world where getting lost wasn't just a possibility. It was an occupational hazard, courtesy of flat Earth maps. Legend has it, ancient adventurers nervously gripped their parchment edges, terrified of venturing too close to the end. We love picturing medieval mapmakers doodling waterfalls plunging into the abyss, or sailors stashing parachutes next to salted pork, just in case. Enter reality, the ultimate photobomber. Since ancient Greece, most scholars knew the Earth was a sphere. Aristotle and Eratosthenes not only did the math, but crafted globes, definitely not frisbees. No self-respecting intellectual booked a plunge off the edge of the world tour. So how did the flat Earth myth become a global inside joke? Blame 19th century writers with wild imaginations and some pop culture spin-offs. Sure, old maps sported monsters and sea serpents, but those were artistic beware signs, not navigation glitches. If Earth were really flat, cats would have pushed everything overboard centuries ago, and that's a catastrophe no one wants. One such misconception was reinforced by phrases mistakenly thought to be common among cartographers. Picture a medieval map where not knowing your geography could cost you your life, and maybe your dignity, to a particularly cranky dragon. Ah, the classic "Here be dragons" warning, as if ancient cartographers were the Yelp reviewers of the unknown, handing out one-star monster reviews to future travelers. Legend has it these ominous words adorned every mysterious or dangerous corner, keeping sailors alert and candle bills sky-high. But here's the scorched truth. "Here be dragons" is about as common on old maps as a polite troll, and almost never in English. The MVP is the Hunt Lennox globe from around 1510, flaunting a lone Latin HCSVNT Dracones. Most mapmakers skipped the slogan and went straight for creature feature mode, doodling monsters with enough teeth to floss a whale, letting art do the threatening. If dragons earned royalties for every cartographic cameo, Smaug would be broke by now. So next time you spot a map dragon, remember, it's probably art class gone wild, not a travel advisory, unless you're dangerously close to the margin. In fact, medieval Mappae Mundi presented the world differently from these stereotypes. Think medieval world maps were your trusty Google Maps? Think again. Mappae Mundi are more like Google Doodles after a few too many meads. The name sounds all official. Mappa Mundi just means map of the world in Latin. But ask one for driving directions, and you might find yourself lost in biblical Eden, river crossing fee not included. Medieval cartographers weren't chasing GPS precision. Nope, theology and symbolism were front and center, while geographic reality played a distant third fiddle. Jerusalem lounged smugly at the map's heart, usually a stone's throw from paradise, provided you could dodge a few lions, dragons, and maybe an overenthusiastic unicorn or two. Sure, Africa and Asia made an appearance, but often stretched, squished, or crawling with mythical beasts. These maps were half atlas, half bestiary, real cities rubbed shoulders with legendary monsters. Try navigating one, and your journey might just end in the belly of a dragon. Hope you packed a snack. So next time Google Maps reroutes you down a bizarre side street, just be grateful you're not caught between a griffin and the Last Judgment. Their purpose extended beyond mere navigation, challenging earlier assumptions. Imagine asking an ancient mapmaker for directions and getting a dragon doodle plus a courteous "good luck" scrawled across the unknown. Step 1 for these early cartographers. When clueless, just toss in a dragon. Spoiler alert for GPS addicts. Ancient maps were less about "turn left" and more about "beware the mythical beast" vibes. Sure, you might expect a map to lead you to your cousin's prized cheese shop via the quickest path, but for old-world mapmakers, navigation was more like a bonus level. Think less Google Maps, more PowerPoint for the universe. Take medieval European TO maps, for example. They plopped Jerusalem right in the spotlight because someone decided it was prime real estate. Geography be damned. Forget rush hour. These maps overflowed with moral lessons, mythical monsters, and subtle endorsements like, "Here be my future summer palace." Ignore the squiggly lines. They blended political flexing, religious worldview, and fantasy so vividly that following one might land you in Atlantis before your cheese stop. Directions? More myth, less mileage. But hey, they sure made a lasting impression. Just don't ask them for street addresses. Still, the integrity of mapmakers was often assumed unquestionable, though this was not always the case. Imagine treating every map like Holy Scripture, believing your GPS is infallible even as it serenely directs you into a lake. There's a charming myth that cartographers are paragons of honesty, rendering the world with saintly precision. But history flips the script. Medieval maps weren't just coastlines. They were prime real estate for educated guesses, vanity projects, and the occasional sea monster cameo. Back then, maps were basically medieval clickbait. Mythical islands and phantom continents sketched out half as navigation aids, half as wistful daydreams. Some eager mapmakers drew lands they'd never laid eyes on, sometimes for fame, sometimes for giggles. Take the elusive Phantom Islands, like High Brazil, which stubbornly appeared on maps for centuries, despite being as real as my neglected houseplant's watering schedule. Maps were also stealth weapons. Faked bays or islands could baffle rivals. Even today, sneaky cartographers, Google included, pepper in fake streets to catch copycats red-handed. If honesty was a requirement, half of Old World Europe would be branded, "Here be myths." And honestly, that's the plot twist we deserve. Moreover, the coordination over standards like the prime meridian was far from unanimous. Thought the prime meridian was just a natural line through Greenwich, politely agreed upon by all. Think again. Imagine history's sharpest minds squabbling over where to draw an invisible line, as if the world were a giant cake and everyone wanted the biggest slice. The prime meridian idea has been kicking around for centuries, with Rome, Paris, and Jerusalem all insisting their zero longitude was the real deal. National pride and a hefty dose of scientific rivalry turned these lines into golden tickets for global bragging rights. Lost sailors and confused mapmakers were the unfortunate casualties in this geodetic game of capture the flag. Every country's maps pointed to a different center, leaving explorers' compasses as perplexed as GPS signals in a tunnel. It wasn't until 1884, at the International Meridian Conference, that Greenwich clinched the crown, thanks in part to British naval muscle, and maybe the best tea selection. Not to be outdone, France stubbornly clung to its Paris meridian for decades. Le resistance in longitude. Spoiler alert, no glowing borders or giant trenches here. You can even stand astride the prime meridian, but don't expect to grow a few inches taller. This lack of agreement sometimes led to intentional inaccuracies on maps. Ever heard of a glow, New York? Neither had anyone else, until it mysteriously appeared on a map. Think cartographers are just humble, trustworthy geography nerds? Think again. The truth twists more than your GPS recalculating after a wrong turn. See, mapmakers have a sneaky side. To catch copycats, they hatch trap streets, fictional roads, bends, or downright fake towns slipped onto maps like copyright booby traps. Yes, Paper Towns isn't just a John Green novel. It's copyright espionage sprinkled with whimsy. When rival map companies accidentally inked these imaginary places, voila, Lawsuit City! Not a real spot, but don't give cartographers ideas. Sometimes these invented locations, like Aglo, fooled enough people to get real signs, or even become pilgrimage sites fueled by rumors. So if you find yourself somewhere that technically doesn't exist, relax. It's not your sense of direction, just a cartographer's prank in the fierce, if nerdy, battle for map supremacy. Waze hasn't started warning about copyright traps yet. Such deliberate choices reveal much about ancient perceptions of the world's shape. What if your GPS insisted dragons lurked just down the street and the Earth abruptly ended at your neighbor's backyard? Welcome to the quirky realm of ancient maps. Part navigation, part fever dream. Back then, cartography was less about pinpoint accuracy and more about spinning stories, flaunting artistic flair, and indulging in a generous monster spotting habit. Most early maps doubled down on the flat Earth theory, sporting sudden edges, mysterious blank spaces, and a glaring disinterest in Australia. Either the kangaroos didn't make the guest list, or no one had yet uttered the word. Perplexed cartographers, clueless about what lay beyond familiar shores, stuffed the gaps with wild imaginings, ornate sea serpents, ominous scribbles like, "Here be dragons," and enough tentacles to make you wonder if medieval mapmakers were paid by the mythical limb. The Greeks briefly flirted with a round Earth, but medieval Europeans settled on flat. It was comfier, plus drawing waterfalls spilling off the edges was way easier. Fantastical empires, lost paradises, and rivers of literal gold flowed across charts, revealing more about human dreams, and perhaps a surplus of medieval wine, than actual geography. Thankfully, explorers and scientists eventually showed up to sort things out. The monsters faded away, though if early mapmakers had Photoshop, the Bermuda Triangle might still boast the world's strangest right angle. Yet during the Dark Ages, knowledge such as mapping Europe deteriorated significantly. Ever wonder why medieval maps resemble the geography homework of a wildly imaginative toddler? Strap in for a continental misadventure. Some believed Europe ended right at their local pub, or at least where dragons and decorative sea monsters frolicked. Spoiler alert, Villagers weren't genuinely convinced you'd tumble off the edge of the world into a pit of fire-breathing lizards. But let's be honest, accuracy had checked out early. Medieval mapmakers weren't lost. Their priorities just went wandering. Instead of tracing coastlines, they sketched wild beasts, upside-down castles, and of course, plopped Jerusalem smack dab in the center. Because divine symbolism trumped longitude and latitude every time. The Romans had cartographic skills, sure, but when Rome fell, their map-making mojo retreated to monasteries, content to snooze behind scrolls and stained glass. Here be monsters signs filled in for genuine knowledge. Honestly, medieval sailors probably navigated Europe more by smell and gossip than by any globemaker's directions. And if you think you're hopeless with directions, imagine trying to find Paris on a map that just says, somewhere this way, maybe. Thankfully, by the late Middle Ages, contact with the Islamic world and rediscovery of Roman texts brought some much-needed map sense, finally putting Europe back where it belonged. Proof that winging it is a truly time-honored European tradition. This makes Ptolemy's maps all the more remarkable as representations of the known world. Imagine navigating the world with a map that insists India looks like a squished mitten. Welcome to the Cartographic Comedy Club, starring Claudius Ptolemy, the 2nd century's version of Google Maps, if Google mostly guessed and occasionally threw darts at the wall. His magnum opus, the Geographia, catalogued roughly 8,000 places, serving as the ultimate reference for both intrepid explorers and armchair travelers for over 1,400 years. Europe, Asia, and North Africa got decent screen time, but the rest? Left to your imagination. Or maybe a sea monster cameo. His latitude lines were impressively accurate for a time when updates meant waiting centuries. But his longitudes? Let's just say they had more issues than a reality TV drama. To Ptolemy, the world was snugly compact, ideal for ancient step counting. Later mapmakers filled the blanks with dragons and wild stories, yet Ptolemy's maps still inspired explorers to risk tumbling off the world's edge. Good luck finding Asia, unless you're up for an unexpected detour to Atlantis. Still, challenges like accurately determining longitude remained unresolved then. Picture a toga-clad Greek confidently charting a course across the Aegean, armed with nothing but a sundial and boundless optimism. Legend has it, ancient sailors navigated the seas with supernatural precision, Poseidon's personal GPS, perhaps? But reality was far saltier. While Egyptians and Greeks could eyeball latitude by measuring the sun's angle, longitude was a wild beast still untamed. Tracking east or west meant knowing the exact time back home, and ancient mariners' timekeepers were about as reliable as a politician's promise. Even when Chinese, Arab, and Indian navigators raised the bar, their best longitude calculations were essentially educated guesses, blessed by a lucky rabbit's foot. The main strategy? Dead reckoning. Plotting your position by praying you hadn't drifted 3 islands off course. Frankly, back then, lost at sea wasn't a disaster. It was a lifestyle choice. No wonder Odysseus took 10 years. He probably just needed a decent clock. Moreover, map-making was often a collaborative effort rather than the work of a single genius. Raise your hand if you picture ancient map-makers as wild-haired, torch-lit loners, secretly charting the world while hoarding all the best snacks. The myth of the solitary cartographic genius sticks around, starring in movies and bedtime tales alike. But in reality, the only thing solitary about map-makers was their social life. So invisible even a GPS couldn't find it. Map-making was a bona fide team sport. Ancient Greeks gathered like a spirited pub trivia crew, hashing out geography over debated drinks. Medieval monks didn't just doodle maps in quiet corners. Entire scriptoria were buzzing. Think less isolated monk, more monastery startup team. Fast forward to the age of exploration, where every voyage rolled deep. Surveyors, navigators, artists, and the indispensable guy who actually remembered where we camped, all on deck. These crews were the avengers of their era, assembling for every new continent's grand reveal. Venice and London thrived on cartographic collaboration, their guilds swapping tips like the original IT squads. Just swap out tangled network cables for tangled compass lines. Even today, crowdsourced data rules the roost, living proof that solo mapmaking usually ends one way: lost. especially if you're navigating IKEA. Interestingly, ancient maps tended to persist longer than expected before being replaced. Imagine buying a brand new smartphone, only to discover it's still stuck on Windows 95. You'd expect an upgrade, right? Most of us assume ancient maps worked the same way. A shinier, more accurate version appears, and the old one gets tossed into the recycling bin, or whatever the ancient Alexandria equivalent was. But here's the twist. Those maps hung around for centuries, quirks, whales, and wandering sea monsters included. Instead of wiping the slate clean, medieval scribes spent hours lovingly, some might say obsessively, tracing maps. Errors and all, like historians with a flair for melodrama. When a bold explorer finally realized India wasn't where Ptolemy claimed, nobody redrew the whole map. Nope, they just scribbled a note in the margin. P.S. Might be that-a-way. Imagine Google Maps updating by slapping on random sticky notes. Old maps were treasured artifacts, more Mona Lisa than Apple Maps. Fixing mistakes wasn't just tricky, it was costly. Try hitting Ctrl+Z with a quill and sheepskin. Some of these legendary maps kept guiding navigators, policymakers, and the occasional would-be world conqueror for generations. Honestly, if you think your GPS is slow to update, try waiting 100 years for Ptolemy's Wi-Fi to sync.